Now, if you remember from our first week, we talked about labor trafficking having just a variety of things underneath it. I told you there was about 26 different divisions underneath that. The common types of labor trafficking include bonded labor, forced labor, and child labor. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to break those down for you so you can understand them a little more clearly before we go on. So, bonded labor is also known as debt bondage, and it's the most widely used method of enslaving people. Debt bondage occurs when a person is forced to work to pay off a debt. Labor is demanded as a means of repayment for a loan or services in which its terms and conditions have really not been clearly defined. So, they're tricked into working for little to no pay and have very little control over their debt. Most or all of the money goes to pay off a loan, and the value of their work invariably becomes greater than the original sum of their loan. So, a laborer could begin with an initial debt of $200, and then while working and unable to leave, that worker needs shelter, food, water, and so the employer tacks on $25 to $50 a day to cover those expenses, and consequently, the employee only grows his debt while continuing to labor for his debtor, and repayment is nearly impossible. So people bonded by debt face coercion, violence, and intimidation if they try to leave. And sometimes that debt can be passed down from generation to generation, especially in other countries. So the children are held in debt bondage because of a loan their parents had taken. And debt bondage is an element of many other forms of slavery, such as forced labor and trafficking, which we'll move into in a second. So people borrow money to pay off their traffickers for a promised job abroad, and then once at their destination, typically the passports are taken away, the visas, whatever, are taken away until they can repay that debt, which then is actually never repayable. And so they're in bondage to that debt. Then there's forced labor, and forced labor is a situation in which victims are forced to work against their will under the threat of violence or some other form of punishment. Their freedom is restricted, and a degree of ownership is then exerted. Almost all slavery practices contain some element of forced labor. It happens in the context of poverty, lack of sustainable jobs and education, as well as a weak rule of law, corruption in an economy, and an economy that is dependent on cheap labor. We're going to talk quite a bit more about that. So forced labor affects millions of men, women, and children around the world, and it's most often found in industries with a lot of workers and not a lot of regulation. So other categories of slavery are a subset of forced labor and include things like domestic servitude, agricultural labor, sweatshop factory labor, janitorial, food service, other service industry labors, and begging. And then there's child labor. And that's a form of work that is likely to be hazardous to the health and or physical, mental, spiritual, moral, or social development of a child. It will interfere with their education. So supply, needs, and industry demand for cheap, unskilled labor, and that's some of the leading causes of child labor. So specifically, production produces processes that require certain physical attributes, such as small stature or agility, lead to the employment of children. And then price pressure, of course, will encourage suppliers, especially at the top of the supply chain, to find the cheapest labor possible. And that ends up being children. And poverty will lead children to accept those jobs, or their parents will ask them to work in order to supplement income, family income. And if it's not clear already, we focus primarily on domestic trafficking. Love to Hope does. But when it comes to labor trafficking, there's such a crossover. So I'm speaking at a global level here, especially when it comes to child labor in other countries, because that is affecting actually us as consumers here in the United States. So just keep that in mind as we keep going. And then child sexual slavery and trafficking are connected to other forms of slavery. So children could be forced into domestic servitude on the labor trafficking, and along the way become sexually abused by their new family, and or sometimes forced into marriage. So there's that crossover there. Okay.
Oh, one of the other ones that you may have heard mentioned is by Operation Underground Railroad, which is a fantastic organization and resource led by a former Navy SEAL. He's doing a lot of work and teaming up actually with the U.S. government. They had SWAT teams around the world going in and rescuing boys and girls from labor and sex trafficking, and are now doing that along the border here in the U.S. as well, teaming up with ICE and law enforcement. But one of the things that they've done a lot of work with is over in northern Africa into India with organ harvesting. And so if you've heard about that, I want to make sure you know that, yes, that very much is something that is happening on a very regular basis because there is a massive need for organs on the black market for people that can pay premium prices for it to save their loved ones or save themselves. And because there is such a demand, there is a supply. And that is happening at an alarming rate. So Operation Underground Railroad says. So that's another piece that we're not going to dive into tonight, but I do want you to know that that is one of them in case you've heard that before. It is very true. Now, on the first evening, I did tell you that on a slide like this, the most important thing to take away is the fact that there are more slaves today than any other time in human history. Maybe you remember me saying that. That's what you need to take away because honestly, looking through and doing our own research, we see anywhere from 25 million up to 45 million when it comes to the number of slaves. There's just a lot of slaves, and there's more than ever before. So please remember that. Don't necessarily need to remember the exact number. But so you know how it is divided up. Forced exploitation, 5 to 6 million. Forced labor, 4 million. And 16 million trapped in forced labor. So state imposed. That actually means that countries, governments, are requiring their citizens, even underage, to work so that their economies can stay afloat in third world countries. The government is actually imposing these things in certain areas of the world, which is really alarming. But the good news about the fact that even though you see millions and millions with these numbers, is the fact that since 2000, governments have been teaming up with like the World Health Organization and organizations like Operation Underground Railroad and the organizations that go in and take a look at whether or not it's fair and ethical when it comes to the production of cotton and cocoa beans for chocolate, for T-shirts and stuff like that. And they have freed almost 100 million child slaves in the last 20 years. 100 million children have been freed since 2000. So the good news is, as we talk more and more about this and get more of this information out, share this amongst your own networks, it is making a big impact. 100 million less kids in forced labor is a pretty big deal because of the focus work that everyone's doing, and it comes from awareness. It comes from us speaking up. It comes from you going to the grocery store and saying, I don't see enough fair trade coffee here, and talking to the store manager and saying, can you get more of that and less of this? And here's why I'm suggesting that. We can make a difference with our voice, especially in smaller communities when we know people a lot better and we have those personal relationships. So the people in this room alone can make an impact at just the grocery stores here to carry more fair trade stuff. So I digress a little bit on that, but I do want to make sure you guys know that good work's being done, and even though it looks like it's hopeless, we have been able to see great successes because of awareness and the work that's being done.
There is a common belief that labor trafficking doesn't affect most of us. It's something that's going on in other countries, and it happens to faraway people in faraway places. But the truth is that labor trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery that exists throughout the United States as well. In the U.S., more foreign victims are found in labor trafficking than in sex trafficking. We did talk about that, how labor trafficking constitutes the largest numbers of the statistics. But we emphasize sex trafficking and kind of ignore labor trafficking too much. And so it is the bigger number. Victims are targeted once they arrive in the U.S., or foreign recruiters may bring the forced laborers to the U.S. using fraudulent or coercive means. And so immigrants can be vulnerable to US-based traffickers because they're unfamiliar with the language, American customs, the job process, and so it's easy to trick. So forced labor takes place in many different industries. And so in the United States, common types of labor trafficking include people forced to work in homes as domestic servants, farm workers that are coerced through violence as they're harvesting crops, or factory workers held in inhumane conditions. It's also been reported in door-to-door sales crews. There's construction work, carnivals, restaurants, hotels, health and beauty services. So it's different. Forced labor is different from substandard or exploitative working conditions that are found in some factories and employment opportunities worldwide. So there is a difference between forced labor and labor exploitation. So victims of unfair or low wages, like those in sweatshops, would not necessarily be considered enslaved because they don't work under the threat of a penalty or without volunteering their employment. So their employment is a different form of exploitation, but it's still related to the similar desire to gain a profit off of the backs of other people. So again, if you remember that AMP model, there has to be some of that coercion or force or fraud within there as a means. All right, according to the Urban Institute report, 71% of trafficked workers will arrive to the U.S. on a temporary work visa. Most commonly H-2A visas for work in agriculture or H-2B visas for jobs in hospitality, construction, restaurants. And then female domestic servitude victims will arrive on a diplomatic or business or tourist visa, and they're also identified in labor trafficking as well. So individuals who enter the U.S. without authorization are most commonly trafficked in agriculture or domestic work, okay? So we already talked about how labor traffickers will kind of manipulate some of that vulnerability as far as lack of understanding customs or the language. They make a false promise of paying a high-paying job or a better education or a better opportunity for their kids, travel opportunities, and to lure people into horrendous working conditions. And then, of course, when the victims arrive, they find that what was promised is not at all what is being offered, and then they have physical abuse, debt bondage, confiscation of passports and money, and they have no other choice, or they believe they have no other choice than to continue working. There's threat of deportation and all of those things. So vulnerable populations are frequently targeted by traffickers. Even at the sort of global, international level, they'll come to a village with the promise of betterment for your children and for your lifestyle, and take them and end up, making rugs somewhere or in rock quarries or something like that. So when it comes to the United States, I've passed out among the audience members some stories of they're real stories put out by Polaris Project of trafficking victims in the United States. And so I thought it might be just kind of an interesting change to hear from somebody else for a second and hear these stories. So whoever has the first one, if you want to do the first click. There is a story out there called Kept in the House or Domestic Work. So who has that story? Okay.
Irene applied for a job through an international recruitment agency that connected household workers with families in the U.S. She accepted a job with a California couple who promised they would pay her $1,500 a month and sponsor her temporary work visa. Upon her arrival, they forbade Irene from ever leaving the home, always arming the security system to keep her confined. For 18 hours a day, Irene cooked, cleaned, and cared for the children, but she was never paid. Help, she wrote on a piece of paper one day when a repairman visited the house. Alarmed, the repairman contacted the National Human Trafficking Help, who worked with the police to help Irene escape and arrest her traffickers. Irene was connected to a local service provider and ended up returning home to her family.
find a lot of these stories have that similar, promise of something better, all taking place in the United States. So this was a repair man who actually was able to help her. And there are organizations that send out training videos to people that will be doing services on properties to actually be watching out, whether it's electrician or whatever. All right, someone has a traveling sales crew story.
I'm not going to stay here anymore, Sam told its managers after his 10th month selling magazines door to door. He had joined the traveling crew after dropping out of college, but his managers didn't pay him and frequently said that they would abandon him on the side of the road if he didn't meet his quota. Sam was terrified of this threat because he had seen other members of the crew abandoned before, usually in unfamiliar cities and towns without any money or resources to get back home. Sam tried to follow the rules, but when he didn't make quota, he was left in a small town in Ohio without any money. Sam had to walk for hours before he could find a bus station and contact a cousin for help. By the time he got home, he hadn't eaten for 3 days.
Patience and tolerance to the people selling things. Actually, let's recognize them as people and wonder and ask questions and be investigative of what's actually happening. Abuse in your food, agriculture.
But I was promised $11 an hour, he protested. Manuel had been recruited in Guanajuato, Mexico, to work on a potato farm in North Carolina. The recruiters charged Manuel and 40 other Mexican males $1,200 each for their H-2A visa, despite these fees being illegal. When Manuel and his coworkers tried to complain, their supervisors physically abused them and threatened to have them deported. By the end of the season, despite his 12-hour workdays, Manuel hadn't even earned enough money to cover his recruitment fee. The National Human Trafficking Hotline connected him with a pro bono lawyer who helped Manuel obtain his wages. Manuel is now an advocate for other survivors of human trafficking.
Health and beauty.
I can't breathe through all these films, 26-year-old Twee told the manager at the salon. Twee was still in her internship period, and not receiving an hourly wage for the 15 hours a day she was working. This is very difficult than a lucrative job offer she had received back in Vietnam, where she was promised a green card. She had been shuffled between salons in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania over a year and never heard of this promise again. She relied on her bosses for food, transportation, clothes, and more, since she did not speak English and had no knowledge of her surroundings.
Ladies, huh? Yep. All right. Restaurants. Who has that one? Oh.
The gangs that ruled the streets of El Salvador had been threatening Fernando to join them. When he continued to resist them, they went after his family, killing them. "You have no choice now," they told him. Afterwards, Fernando had nowhere to live and had to escape the country. He met a smuggler who charged him $5,000 for help getting to the U.S. "Don't worry, I'll get you a good job. You'll be able to pay me back soon." Fernando traveled for 12 straight days until he reached the Texas border, where a restaurant owner was waiting to purchase him and 4 other young men. The victims have never received a dime in the 5 years they've washed dishes at the restaurant. Frightened of being deported back to a violent fate back home, Fernando's and the others continue to work there today.
Okay, so that kind of plays into even the sex trafficking thing when we talk about homeless teens or teens that run away. They go from one really bad situation right into a worse one because they're exploited for that need to be safe and have a family and a place. peddling and begging.
Sean was in middle school in his hometown of Orlando, Florida, when his mother, who worked 2 jobs to barely make ends meet, told him to find an after-school activity while she worked evenings. "You should join this club I'm in," his friend Lawrence told him. "They organize trips and help with school." Sean joined, but soon learned that he would have to work selling candy at a nearby shopping center to earn his spot. Sean worked outside in the winter from 4 p.m. till midnight on school days and up to 13 hours on the weekends. Sean never got a portion of the donations, and the promised enrichment activities never materialized. The organization started paying Sean for every person he recruited and now relies on this income to support his mother.
And one more, construction. Who's got the last one?
Pratik was hired by a marine service company to repair shipyards after Hurricane Katrina. He came to America through the guest worker visa program, having paid $10,000 in recruitment fees after being promised a good job and permanent residency for him and his family. "After I worked in America for a while, you can join me there," he promised his children. But when he arrived, Pratik learned that things were not as promised. He was forced to work around the clock and had to pay over $1,000 a month to live in a crowded labor camp with other workers. Anyone who tried to leave was threatened with deportation. Pratik was finally able to escape, and together he and his co-workers won one of the largest labor trafficking stories in history.
Any thoughts on hearing those stories? Any surprises, or how did they make you feel? Would anyone like to share? It's pretty crazy that so much can be happening really right in front of us, and we're unaware that so much trafficking can happen right in our sort of what we have labor laws, we have rules in America, and yet there is so much victimization. So, all right, we're gonna keep moving on.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that a little bit. Even though we live in a smaller community here in Wilmer, we do know that labor trafficking does exist here, as well as sex and drug trafficking. It is happening. But you are all connected to many people around the country that live in urban areas as well. That people like, what was the first gal's name? What's that? Irene, yeah. She was in a bigger city in California where that happened. And so just sharing the information, using social media, you're helping to fight slavery today. Just sharing stuff and getting information out. So keep that in mind. We want to get this spread to as many people across the country as we can, because eyes do make a difference. And you have heard the name National Human Trafficking Hotline mentioned at least 3 times today already. I don't know if we gave you time the first night to put that in your phone, but we will give you that number at the end of the night tonight. And it is our hope that every one of you will just get your phone out and create a contact tonight and just have that number in there, just in case you come across something that doesn't feel right or look right. Just call the number, because people are rescued because of people like us calling in when we see something that doesn't look right. Now, how does labor trafficking affect me? How does it affect you? If you read along with me, every day, before we get to work, we're eating, wearing, walking, talking slavery. Every one of us every day touches, wears, and eats products tainted with slavery. Slavery-made goods and commodities are everywhere in our lives. And this is from Kevin Bales, and we're about to watch a short video from Kevin. And he has done a lot of work when it comes to in the world of labor trafficking, and has great resources. So if you want to learn more about this and get your hands a little dirtier, he is a great guy to be learning from and to look up. But what's important to realize is here, the more we demand cheaper products, you have to remember that when it's cheap for us, it's really expensive typically for somebody else. So it's important to check ourselves when we get to that spot where we're looking to buy something for 99 cents. Like, why is this product 99 cents, and do I really need it? So think about that as we now move into the next phase of our discussion tonight, talking more about products. But let's watch this short video first. Takes a second to load.
One of the things that's important to know about slavery is that it never went away. We sometimes think it stopped in the 19th century, but it didn't. There are about 27 million people in slavery around the world, and they're caught up in all kinds of harsh, ugly work. And some of that work feeds commodities and raw materials and agricultural products into the global economic system. We've got to do everything we can to make sure that that slavery doesn't reach into our lives and touch us. To the things that we buy and sell, the things that we produce, and the things that we use. This isn't a gotcha game. This isn't anybody being guilty. It's about all of us wanting to take responsibility for making sure that the things that we use and enjoy in our life are actually free of that ugly taint of slavery.
If you go to the mine, it's because you have no other way to live. If I don't work that day, we are going to starve.
I didn't know how to weave, but I was taught by beating me up repeatedly. They beat me up each time I made a mistake.
Life below the slave owners was complete hell. It was certain that they would lock us inside our house and burn us down. They almost did. They were checking house to house, and this is when they got us. They took us to the forest with them.
Slavery penetrates into lots and lots of products. And I've seen with my own eyes slaves cutting down forests to burn them into charcoal that will then be used by the steel industry in Brazil to make steel, which is then exported to the United States and to Western Europe and made into everything from toys to skyscrapers. I've seen with my own eyes children working in farms in Africa harvesting cocoa and coffee. I've seen mines that had slave workers in them digging up gold and cassiterite and coltan that's used in cell phones. The work is just as dangerous and just as horrific as slavery has always been.
We know it's dangerous work because sometimes a big storm may come and cover the hole where you are working and kill you. I know one boy who died.
We were confined to a room and made to work for 12 hours a day. There was only once in a day that we could go and maybe use the bathroom.
My hand. The owners boiled the oil, closed my eyes, and put my fingers in it.
She would take a little bit of kerosene and put it on my wound and strike a match to it. That would hurt terribly. The wound would not heal, and we were made to resume weaving again.
The slaveholder hired men armed with guns and axes, and they guarded us the entire day.
I was kept in chains. That was the most fearful part for me.
Here, I earned nothing. It was a false dream. In the end, I was here working, and I was a slave.
We can't be the police, but we can be the people who say, we're not
love technology or it drives you
this. If suppliers and businesses in the say we're not having it, we're not going to accept minerals that are touched by slavery, commodities, agricultural products that are touched by slavery.
All right.
We'll tell you where you can watch that video.
Yeah, we'll have to link it on our Facebook page. So if you haven't followed our Facebook page, we'll set a link on there. So, okay, well, hopefully that gave you a little bit of a glimpse of what's happening internationally. But he was really about to tie it back into how it really, how we are feeding what's going on by our demands, and actually what we can do. And specifically, he's talking to businesses, but it translates down to us as consumers too, is what we can do to have transparency in the supply lines and demand some of those fair trade things. So by supporting fair pay for workers and basing our purchasing choices on the fair treatment of those who make our products, consumers, us, we have the power to reduce the demand for labor trafficking. There's a direct correlation between human trafficking and unchecked consumerism, especially as we desire cheaper and cheaper products. If we're going to demand cheap products, then that's going to produce a supply of cheap labor. And so it really is sort of like a oof when we realize how much power we have as American consumers to control what's happening in the other side of things. So we have to awaken to the reality of the not so free market. And we have to realize that every consumer has the responsibility and the capacity to think through and to choose wisely what we purchase, ensuring that our everyday purchases are not having a detrimental effect on other people. Because the reality is that our coffee, clothes, smartphones, the raw materials in those things most likely have been made by slaves. And so we want to encourage you to be a conscious consumer. And Sean already mentioned at the beginning the importance of giving yourself a lot of grace. The reality is that we're all stewards or caretakers of the Lord's money. He's blessed us, and we have to think through, and we have to ask him what our purchases, if they're honoring to him, and how we can make individual changes. But we can't go on a guilt trip or live in fear or in judgment of others who don't have the same shopping decisions or choices that we make. It really is sort of this personal thing before the Holy Spirit. But we do believe in the power of the collective voice, and we do believe that consumers have, a great amount of control coming from their pocketbooks. And so we're going to give you some tips to be a conscious consumer and hopefully be able to decrease your slavery footprint and make change together.
Yeah, so this slide is where you want to take notes or take pictures of the slide because it's very practical stuff y'all can start tonight when you leave here, becoming abolitionists right in your own home with your money that's in your wallet or your purse tonight. So first, if you want to take this step, and you will have to carve out a chunk of time to do it, it's a survey that you can take at slaveryfootprint.org. And what you do is you go take this survey and you punch in, you enter a lot of the information regarding your shopping habits. So how much chicken versus how much beef versus how much produce, the types of clothes you wear, brand names, stuff like that. And at the end of the survey, it will then spit out a number of slaves that you have working for you in your home. Now, I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but Kay, when she did it, we had about 30 plus slaves working for us based on the food we ate and the clothes that we wore in our home. And so it will open your eyes, and it'll help paint a picture maybe for you as a couple or as a family on changes that you could make based on what you see and what you enter, and with this extra information that I'm about to share with you next. So when it comes to the top products that are most consumed in the United States that have the highest slavery footprint, these are those, okay? So coffee, chocolate, tea, sugar, bananas, and clothing. Coffee being at the top of the list, chocolate right up there with it, tea, sugar, bananas, and clothing. Now, Kay and I have never found, at this point, bananas that are fair trade, correct? We have not found those in a grocery store. Yeah. I love grocery shopping. I used to do it all, but now she orders everything online and we go pick it up. So me learning about fair trade products, do you see fair trade labels when you're shopping online? Some of them you do? Good. Because when you're in the store and you touch it, you can see this stuff a lot better. And then clothing is a big one. So when it comes to clothing, obviously, yes, there is what we call fair trade clothing, and I'm going to show you a bunch of labels that you want to be looking for when it comes to ethically produced materials, clothing. And there are sites that you can go to shop for your clothes that are fair, that are fair trade, and there are great sites that you can go to and order from around the world that actually employ people that have been freed from slavery and are being paid fair wages for that. What is the jewelry line that your mom? Oh, okay. All right. I won't jump that gun. All right. So these are the most common labels that you're going to see, and I'm going to point to the one that is most common right here. This one right here is the one that you will see most often in stores right around here. You'll see them at Cub, you'll see them at Walmart, you will see them at Aldi, actually has quite a few, and then also at Cashwise, and if I missed any. Hopefully Teal's Market. However, I haven't shopped in Spicer very much, just twice, when we still lived in an RV a year ago, because we were camping out there, or living camping. So Slave-Free Shopping Guide is another great place to go, and I'm going to give you even more information on the next slide. But this information, you guys, right here, is stuff that you want to take with you and share with as many people as you possibly can, because if enough people are demanding and starting to buy less of the non-fair trade and buy more of the fair trade coffee, it will make a difference. Chocolate is a huge one. And the chocolate companies that are the American chocolate companies that are out there that we know well, they are some of the worst. And what we've learned from some of the documentaries we're watching. However, you can get fair trade chocolate. So Aldi is a great example. They do have lots of fair trade chocolate there, more than the other stores typically that I have found when I've done my grocery shopping. Definitely tea. I have not seen fair trade sugar in my shopping, but you have? Okay. And then, like I said, clothing, absolutely online. You can go to Amazon and look up fair trade clothes, and it'll pop up all kinds of products that are available to you to buy that are not tainted with slavery. So there's definitely something you can do to make a difference.
We sell some too, just shameless plug.
Oh yeah, our T-shirts are slave-free. Yeah, so I do want to share with you the fact that there are certain brands. So if you are in a place in your career, or you know of people, or you're on committees for groups where they buy T-shirts, bulk T-shirt orders, there are specific brands that are very much tainted with slavery and those that are not. And we will definitely share those with you. So if you ever have a question on that, if you're in a buying capacity for bulk T-shirts for a group, reach out to us, and we will definitely tell you, because we've done a lot of research on that end. Obviously, because of what we do for a living, we didn't want to walk around wearing slave-made T-shirts and selling those when we're talking about all this stuff, if you can imagine that.
We should take just a minute just to clarify fair trade, just in case there are people that don't really understand that terminology. So those fair trade labels or fair trade certified labels, what that just means, it's a clean slavery line from the harvesting of the cocoa bean in Africa or to the coffee you're drinking or the chocolate bar you're eating or the cotton ball to the T-shirt you're wearing. There's no slavery footprint. Attaining a fair trade label is hard. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that there can't be sort of deceit or looking away or I'm not saying that can't happen. But it's the best we have as American consumers to try to decrease our slavery footprint and go with that. I will also say that these tips that we're giving you, some of them may seem trite. Like, okay, so I came here tonight, you're going to tell me, buy fair trade coffee and you'll save the world. And maybe you're thinking that that's just too simple. But in a lot of ways, it really is that simple. And so the power, again, of our collective voice to make change. If our demand for cheap products produces cheap labor, then we can also demand change to have some of the things removed from our products that we don't want. You can see that play out in other labels. So as consumers, we decide we don't want GMOs in our product. And so we start demanding. And now you see labels, non-GMO, or we don't want high fructose corn syrup. So there's this big push. And so every ketchup bottle and bread out there, no high fructose corn syrup. Okay? We're doing the same with no pesticides. It's organic. And so there's a million stamps, right, on our products. Why are those showing up? Because we're protesting the things we don't want in our products, and they're responding. And so I just always say, well, why can't we just demand no slaves and get the fair trade label on more things? And it really is about choosing not to purchase what isn't fair trade, really supporting that, and the numbers will speak. And so it is a collective voice to make a difference.
So using technology, there are some great apps that you can download right onto your phone, and you can actually scan barcodes of products that you frequently buy in your own home, and they'll give you the slavery footprint for those products. And so go online and take a look at maybe all three you want on your phone, or read up on each of those apps and see which one might work best for you. But if each of you could download even one of them, you would be making a difference when it comes to educating yourself and buying more products that are slave-free. And then when we can, you want to shop locally grown whenever we can. Farmers markets are a great way for us to reduce, reuse, recycle. Shop secondhand when you can. Think, goodness, God blessed me with a wife who's frugal, because she loves bargains and blessings. And I feel so good. I'm like, you go shop, honey. Absolutely. Not only because we save money, but also the products are being reused. So I know that we're not directly contributing to this issue that we're talking about tonight by reusing products that have already been purchased. And so keep that in mind as well. Now, there are incredible documentaries. So The Dark Side of Chocolate is all about the chocolate trade. And when I talked to you about the big chocolate companies in America being definitely guilty, they are. And The Dark Side of Chocolate, Nothing Like Chocolate, they will go into great detail about that. And so you can watch that with kids under 10 years old. Those documentaries are just fine. So I would encourage you to go down that route and learn more about specific products that the majority of us enjoy on a very regular basis, especially chocolate in our house. Not me, but in my house for sure. And then True Cost, we're actually going to show you the trailer for True Cost. I would just love for this group, can we just stick together every week for like 4 more weeks? And we can just keep coming back and we can watch some really good stuff and have great group discussions. Would you guys be up for that? Because I sure would. Some of you are like, no way. Absolutely not. But I'm up for it if any of you are up for it, because I know that the chances of you going home and watching the majority of these documentaries is very slim. But if there's a group setting where we go and we have good momentum, the chances are high. So if you're up for it, I'm absolutely up for it. And we do have a pastor, or a couple pastors in the house that have a little bit of pull, I think. You have a lot of pull. Oh, Clint's like, I have pull. He's over there shaking his head. Okay, all right. Of course you would say that. FreeTheSlaves.net's really great. And then our website now has good resources, but as it's getting reconstructed, we'll have a ton more great resources. So please go to our website and use all the free stuff that's there. That's why we have it. All right? Next one.
Some other tips. Sean already talked a little bit about reusing and recycling. Again, it's just a great way to not directly contribute. So it's hard to find fair trade items in a lot of things, but if you are recycling things that people have discarded, it's just an awesome way to help the economy and the slavery footprint. So support companies that have transparent supply chains. Big businesses typically are afraid of exploring their supply chains because they're afraid that they'll discover something that's going to get picked up by the media. And so they just kind of don't go there. 2/3 of big businesses admit they only go one level deep. They know their direct supplier, and they really don't pay much attention to what's happening beyond that. So the more transparent a company can get, there is a website called Global Business Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and they have lists of innovative businesses that are more transparent. So if you wanted to investigate further, Global Business Coalition Against Trafficking. If you think maybe your company or places that you shop don't have transparent supply chains, then why don't you just use your voice? Write a letter and start asking for more transparency. Make your voice heard. Send a letter to the companies that make your favorite brands. Ask them to step up and help end slavery. And there are, and again, I will have these on our updated website. Maybe I'll make a few Facebook posts with some of these links as well. But Chain Store Reaction and Made in a Free World both help you write those letters and show you how to draft them up and send them out. So I know I'm so much better about signing petitions and letters that have already been written by somebody and like, I agree with this letter, and I'll send it off. So that is something you can do there too. Buy survivor-made goods. Empowerment is really where it's at about restoration for human trafficking survivors. Survivor-made goods are available in just so many, a lot of home-based business kind of a type of direct sales sell those. If you know Trades of Hope, if you know Noonday, if you know V-Bella, they have materials that are made by people that are either have been saved from exploitation or this prevents them from being exploited by giving them sustainable income and selling their products. They're great things. There's also To the Market, Free Set Global, Shop for Freedom. And so those are really great places. And again, I'll throw some of this stuff out. I don't know if you're following our Facebook page. We've put a bunch of parent information after last week's on there, so you can find some of those links. And so I'll do the same this week. I'll work on labor trafficking posts. And then the final week is on pornography and on ending the demand. That's next week. And that's a tough topic. That's a dark topic, so be praying for us as we prepare for that. Whenever we speak on pornography, we get so much spiritual attack. And so I just think that's just one place Satan is like, you're not going to claim ground in this area. And so if you just be buffering us with prayer, that'd be great. But we'll continue to post information after we speak on something about that topic so that you've got some resources in your hands. And then be mindful of your purchasing motives. And that really is that heart check. You know, Americans are told to pursue the American dream, to make your house beautiful, to fit an image, to make your body beautiful. And we can get so caught up in the temporary trappings of this world. And so really it is, again, back to the stewardship of our finances, of our lives, of ourselves. It's about bringing that before the Lord and say, where am I sort of buying into the American dream or the pursuit of worldly wealth that is sort of causing me to overlook, the abuse and exploitation of someone else for my own gain. I want it cheap. I want it pretty. I'm bored with this outfit. I'm bored with this look of my house. I want to upgrade. Not that those things are bad, but check your motivation. Is it sort of image-seeking, pleasure-seeking? Particularly, ladies, we tend to be the biggest consumers in our house, and we tend to be we can get the most caught up on the image side of things. Wanting our house to be trendy or our look to be trendy can cause us to spin things sort of out and into our lives really quickly. Fast fashion is what true cost addresses. That's that documentary we mentioned. We're going to play a trailer on that real quickly, but it really does speak to why are we so quick to get rid of what is perfectly working, but we're bored. So learning how to create sort of a minimal closet, or if you are going to want a new look, could you swap with somebody? Can you work out exchanges or go to thrift stores or things like that? Or are we really just seeking brand names because it gives us clout? And in that regard, are we so much more like the teenagers we spoke about last week, where we're looking for clout, but it just looks differently for us? And so we have to be mindful of that. And that really is that heart check. And it's humbling, but it's really important because we're supposed to be image bearers of the Almighty God and look more and more like Him. And so we want to be mindful if we're trying to put ourselves out there or the Lord out there, which doesn't mean we can't look cute and trendy and our house can't be cute. It's just about checking the motivations and then considering the bottom line. So. All right, let's watch this real quick. Hopefully, I have
We communicate who we are through clothing. It is fundamentally a part of what we wish to communicate about ourselves.
We used to have a system, a fashion system. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fashion industry today. It has been reinvented.
It's based on materialism. The problem is that comes at a really high price.
Garment factory collapsed, killing more than 1,000.
Clashes between clothes factory workers and riot police in Cambodia.
Last November, 112 people were killed in another major factory fire. 30,000 Chinese workers have been on strike.
Garment workers in Bangladesh paying the price for cheap clothing.
Well, the promise of globalization was that it was going to be a win-win, that consumers in the rich world would get cheaper goods and people in the poorer parts of the world would get jobs, and that those jobs would give them an opportunity to work their way out of poverty.
This enormous, rapacious industry that is generating so much profit, why is it that it is unable to support millions of its workers properly?
The actual business model is completely unsustainable. Unless you change that model, you can't change anything.
When everything is concentrated on making profits, what you see is that human rights, the environment, workers' rights get lost.
My God, we can do better than this.
So you saw briefly in that video that there are definitely mortal risks involved because of misuse, labor misuses on our end. In Bangladesh, I heard this statistic, I think it came out of that, upwards of 70% of all clothing is made in Bangladesh, India, which is where that giant factory fire was, and hundreds of people were killed in that fire. And that is happening all over the place in many different countries on a smaller scale. But when we check ourselves and we think about misusing things and purchasing things we really don't need, people are mortally at risk because of things like that. They're being forced to do things in conditions they shouldn't have to. So just another thing to keep in mind.
That True Cost documentary is really good. It's very well done. Highly recommend that you take some time to watch it. That's one your kids can watch. I think there might be a little bit of information on the red light district in that one. I might be blending my documentaries. I don't think they'll actually enjoy that documentary because it is fairly long and talks about sort of the biz. It gets a little bit dry for kids. But like we mentioned, the chocolate ones, if you're wanting to introduce, again, the concept of labor, we talked about that last week. Concept of slavery. We talked about that last week. How can you begin having conversations with your kids about that? Those documentaries are good for that. So, all right. So, looking for signs of labor trafficking. We've heard all these stories of what's taking place in the U.S. And so, how do we actually see and understand what might be happening in front of us? Give us eyes to see so that we can respond. So, these are just some examples. I'm not going to run through all of them, but kind of looking at their work environment. Are they free to come and go? And again, this list isn't exhaustive. It represents just possible indicators. And just because there are some things on this list doesn't mean it's automatically trafficking, of course, but just good for you to know. Cultural differences should also be considered whenever you're looking at trafficking of any kind. Sometimes eye contact, for example, culturally is just not part of it. Doesn't mean there's trafficking. So But anyway, back to their work environment. Are there more reasons to keep them in than allow them out? Sometimes you'll see barbed wire in places that's actually keeping them in, not keeping other people from getting in. Do they have quotas? Is there no contract, no pay slip, sort of it's cash, if anything, under the table? No equipment provided. There's not proper safety. Sort of like, think about Pharaoh's like, make more bricks, but you can't have straw. I mean, that kind of thing can be very common. Like, get the job done, but I'm not actually going to provide you with what you need.
Yeah, we had a recent story in our own home with the guys that came to fill in. So we had siding put on, and they hammered so hard that our drywall screws started popping through. So they had to come through our entire home and fill in. And he was using his hat to try and wipe off the plaster that he was putting on to cover it. So a sign of trafficking is they don't have the tools they need to do the job that they're required to do. I'm not saying it was, but it sure was a red flag for us.
We just have that eyes where we're kind of like skeptical about everything. So it was just, not saying that that's what was going on there, but it was concerning. Like, do you need a rag? I can get you a rag or whatever. So anyway. All right. But all right. Then we want to work on well-being. Look at the well-being. Are the people fearful? Is there always somebody present, kind of speaking for them? Are there signs of abuse, or are they isolated from others? Poor physical health. Again, travel, ID, documents, if they're not in possession of those, don't understand how the system works. They're frequently monitored. They claim to be visiting. All those things, they've been there a long time, but they're still visiting, or maybe they don't fully understand even really where they are. Those are all things to kind of keep in mind. Money, in regards to that, does it look like their money's controlled by someone else? They're making their own not making their own purchasing decisions, not paid directly, or not paid at all, paid only in tips. And then the house, lots of times, even on that egg farm in Ohio, where there was a ton of trafficking going on, we had trailer houses with 15, 20 men in it, or they're living on site. There's too many people. They're living where they work. They don't really know their address. So those are all things you can kind of watch for, and there's more warning signs on the table too for labor trafficking.
All right, so some action steps you can take. Obviously, if you look at to the bottom, there's the number that I was talking about, and we did put it in a weird order, so I'd invite you to get your phones out right now and create a contact, and it is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's easy to memorize, 888-3737-888. So we have been asked many times, is that right? We did put the numbers in a weird order, meaning the dashes in weird spots, just because the 888s make it easier to memorize, and you don't even have to put it in your phone. But that is the actual number. It is correct. And so we would invite you and love it if all of you would put that phone number and just create a contact right now. It'll take up that much space on your phone. Very, very little bit. But jumping back up to the top then, continue to educate yourself, and educate as many other people as we can. Awareness is prevention. Awareness really does work. Over and over and over again for the last 8 years we've been in this fight, we are reminded how important it is to get the word out and just tell people even minimal amounts of information, and it really does make a difference. And then ask questions. So if you have an opportunity to get a personal loan, here are a few questions that you can ask if you want to write these down or type them into your phone. Can you leave your house or your job whenever you want? That's a great question to ask. Where did you get those bruises, or is anyone hurting you? We love to educate cosmetologists, for example, because many times, especially girls that have longer hair, traffickers will have them get tattoos on their neck. And most people wouldn't see that if they wear their hair down, but cosmetologists, obviously, they're touching them and moving their hair, and they do see it. And so these types of questions for them to be able to ask are really important, and there have been cosmetology schools that have now made it mandatory at the government level that this type of education is required for them because of stuff like this. They come in with bruises, they know how to ask questions, and so those questions are important to know and to share with other people. Do you get paid for your employment? Is it fair? So if you get someone coming knocking on your door selling textbooks or whatever it is, those are great questions to ask, because door-to-door sales, trafficking is rampant when it comes to door-to-door sales. Rampant in this country. So those are great questions to ask. Are you or your family being threatened? And so we were in Bakersfield 2 years ago. This May will be 2 years ago. And we were sitting down. I got to go to a task force meeting there, and they were actually talking about not just human trafficking or sex trafficking, but they were talking about a lot about the labor trafficking that was happening. And a sergeant was in the room, law enforcement, and they knew that all these little pop-up stands that were on the corners selling flowers or chocolates during Valentine's Day, they're here too. I've seen them here. Many of those are being labor trafficked. Many of those in Bakersfield, where we were. And the law enforcement officer that was in the room said, yes, we did know. We do know that it's happening. And so, unfortunately, we had to move on to the next question, because I wanted to know, what are you doing about it? Like, what can we actually do about this? But going up and talking and asking questions, if you feel comfortable with that, especially if they're younger looking. If they look like they're under 18, parents might be asking them to go earn money to, put food on their table for the evening. So that does happen on a regular basis. So ask lots of questions, and then demand change. Look at what companies are doing, what governments are doing. Use your power when it comes to legislation that's being worked on and passed state to state and right here in Minnesota, and get involved if that's your gift, if God has given you that gift, and you have the time to do that. We need more people on that side of it as well. It's an uphill battle with that. But the more laws we can get changed, and the more we educate people and our government, the faster this is going to happen. And then, of course, show your support and share the resources that we have on our page and through social media as well. All right. One more? Did you want to prep that one?
No, this was a social experiment, actually, that was put out. I forget what organization put this out, but I find it really interesting, and we're going to end a little early tonight, so if there's questions, we can take them over here. But I think it's a really good way to get us all thinking. I just really like that, because people do care when they know. And that's such the important part of awareness. The fact that you guys are showing up to learn shows that you care. And when we understand something more, it changes the way that we act. It changes the way we think, and it makes a big change nationally and internationally. And God cares so much about this topic. And he cares about the people that are trapped in labor trafficking and the children that are trapped in forced labor. And he cares about how we demonstrate his love with biblical justice. He knows what's best for us. He's going to guide our decisions. He's going to help us be good stewards. And he gives us his spirit of wisdom when it comes to these topics. So we thought we'd close with this verse, Matthew 6:21. We've all probably heard it before. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And it really is true that our hearts follow our treasure. And so if we need to train our hearts sometimes by spending our money and using our money well. So put our treasure where we want our hearts to go, and our hearts will follow because it's what we've invested in. So if we want to see people living free from labor trafficking, if we want our heart and mind to be bent on those things, we have to be conscious consumers. So we just pray that, God will give you all the wisdom that you need to do all the things that he asks you regarding this. So thank you so much for your time tonight. We are ending a good 15 minutes early, so we'll be around at our table for questions. I have a couple of really cool handouts each week. We put them, new ones out based on our topic. This one's called Think About It, and it's put out by the International Labor Organization, and it's really kind of taking a glimpse at your house and pinpointing things you may use and kind of tracing it back to its source. So thinking about the things, and some of those questions and resources that we just talked about at the end are on the back of that, so that's a two-sided. And then this one is put out by endslaverynow.org. And there are 7 things that you can do, 7 ways that you can buy slave-free products. And we talked about some of them, but here they are in print for you tonight. And then, of course, this little card is just for your wallet. They're called shoe cards because sometimes they're given to victims and they stick them in their shoes. But these are things that talk to you about the difference between trafficking and smuggling, and some warning signs or questions you can look for. So that's up here too. And of course, our prayer card and ways to get a hold of us. And I have lots of these posters. So if you have contact with coffee shops, public school bathrooms, or whatever, and you'd like to take them and stick them up around, it's got hotline numbers and just is spreading the word that awareness is happening. So, all right, thank you so much for coming in. You guys have a great night.
Do appreciate y'all being here. Thank you. Means a lot that you keep coming back week after week. Next week is on pornography. Don't let that scare you, please. It's going to be good stuff.